McCullough was the youngest of 5 daughters, and her parents doted on her from the very start. It's pretty common for the youngest child to be the apple of the parent's eye, and this was certainly the case with McCullough. As far as John and Lois were concerned, she could do no wrong, although her siblings had a different view of her. According to them, McCullough had always had trouble fitting in with others. She also happened to be a pathological liar, something that would likely help her later on as she tried to cover up her heinous acts for years on end. However, John and Lois's daughters had a very positive view of their parents, at the very least. They remembered John as a constant jokester who loved making people laugh. He enjoyed playing golf and snooker and had a long career in university education before retiring. As for Lois, she had taken a keen interest in history, with a particular interest in the history of the British royal family. Apart from that, she had a habit of making friends all around the world. In the era before the internet, doing so required a lot of effort on her part, including writing countless letters to her pen pals every day. This showed her commitment to maintaining her social connections, although it's fair to say that the distance helped matters rather than make them more difficult. You see, Lois had suffered from severe mental illness for quite some time. She showed signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder, which became so severe towards the end of her life that she required constant care. This was compounded by the fact that she had extreme agoraphobia, or a pathological fear of open spaces. As a result, it was very difficult for her to go outside, even to buy groceries or run other errands. Her husband took care of those aspects of their lives for as long as he could, but he had physical health issues of his own to deal with. By 2019, he was 70 years old and suffered from type 2 diabetes, glaucoma, and hypertension. In other words, John couldn't be very active, and his eyesight was slowly fading. Basically, John and Lois couldn't live on their own. They needed someone to look after them, someone to act as their primary caregiver. That's where their favorite daughter, Virginia, came in. McCullough was more than happy to move in with their parents and help them out. They loved her for it, and pretty soon, they'd handed her complete control over their finances. Of course, McCullough was not the sort of person you could trust with such sensitive matters, but John and Lois had no way of knowing that. When they looked at their daughter, they saw someone pure and perfect, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. As we'll soon reveal, McCullough was capable of far more than that. By 2019, McCullough was living rent-free in the home of her parents for about 2 years. She told them she had a high-paying job as a web designer, but they refused to let her pay rent due to how much she helped them around the house. She also said that she was working on her career as an artist and that once she made it big, she'd take really good care of them and make sure they lived in the lap of luxury. There's no two ways about it. McCullough was lying through her teeth about everything. For starters, she didn't have a job as a web designer. In fact, the last time she held down a job at all was in 2017 when she had worked as a bartender for a local pub. She had no source of income to speak of, so in a way, it was she that needed her parents rather than the other way around. As for her so-called art career, McCullough apparently didn't have any talent to speak of. She never showed her work at a gallery, and she never tried to study formally at an art institution. If anything, it seemed like a pipe dream. She might have had some aspirations of painting professionally, but there's no evidence whatsoever that she took this goal seriously, and there's a chance that it was all just part of a ruse. You see, McCullough profited greatly from her parents. As soon as her father let her control of the finances, she started taking money out of their savings. However, she didn't buy anything fancy with the money, or really anything useful at all. Instead, she frittered most of it away on online gambling and lost a fair amount in various scams as well. As if that wasn't enough, McCullough had also started to take out several loans under her parents' names. All told, she'd incurred a debt of about £60,000, and it was just a matter of time before John and Lois started noticing discrepancies in their finances. When John took a look at his bank account one day, he noticed that the number was far smaller than it should have been. He asked McCullough about it, assuming that there had been some kind of mistake. There were small withdrawals every single day, and there was no way that his baby girl could be responsible for something like that. McCullough was responsible, of course, but she wasn't going to let John find out about that. Instead, she concocted a story about the bank making errors and hackers potentially stealing money from John's account and told him that she'd take care of it. In the back of her mind, McCullough knew that her time was running out. Sooner or later, John would find out that she'd been stealing from him, and there was no telling what he might do. At the very least, he'd kick her out of the house, and McCullough would have to start paying rent somewhere else. Since she didn't have a job and relied on her parents completely, this would be a catastrophic change in circumstance for her. In March of 2019, McCullough started cooking up a plan to cover her tracks. Fortunately for John and Lois, this plan involved wiping them off the face of the earth. 2019, the other 4 daughters of Lois and John received a text from their parents informing them that they were on vacation in the nearby seaside town of Clacton-on-Sea. Later that night, they received another text wishing them good night. McCullough was the only one living at the residence for quite some time. Pretty soon, neighbors started noticing Lois and John's absence and began inquiring about them. Each time they'd ask, McCullough would say that her parents were sick or off on vacation. Some wondered how long of a vacation the elderly couple could possibly take. They were known to love the seaside, often going for days just to walk along the shore. But weeks had passed without any sign of them. This was a cause for concern, but at the same time, Lois was known to be reclusive. Her agoraphobia meant that she usually stayed indoors as much as possible. So while her and John's absence were a tad strange, it wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. John was a lot more social than his wife, usually going down to the pub on Fridays to meet with his friends. He also went out golfing quite frequently and played snooker at the pub every chance he got. Even so, when Lois was having a particularly bad flare-up of her agoraphobia, he'd stay home with her as well. They loved each other very much, so it was likely that he'd sacrifice some of his social time to help her feel better. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and all the while, no one saw John or Lois at all. However, they did hear from them once in a while. More specifically, Lois would apparently call her doctor to cancel appointments quite often. Her voice sounded strange and unfamiliar, but no one thought twice about it. Her doctor grew concerned that she was missing her appointments, but it would be years before he'd tell anyone about this. And then, in March of 2020, after John and Lois had been absent for about 9 months, something happened that made their disappearance much easier to explain: the pandemic. One thing became clear to the people of Chelmsford: something was deeply wrong with McCullough. She got evasive whenever her parents were mentioned, and neighbors reported hearing her screaming in the home at various times. No one knew if she was screaming at her parents or if she was just having a breakdown, but if it was the former, her parents never replied. McCullough also took part in other forms of bizarre behavior around the town. She began showing up in public places with a clearly fake baby bump, claiming that she was pregnant. Everyone could tell that she was pretending, but no one quite knew how to bring it up. McCullough seemed to have abandoned all logic and reason, and this was just one of the many examples of that. Another example was that she would randomly leave food at her neighbor's front door. And this wasn't home-cooked food either. It was takeout from the local Chinese and fast food places, none of which the neighbors had asked for. She also left bottles of alcohol accompanying the food sometimes, and no one could understand why she was doing things like this. At other times, her neighbors noticed she'd constantly be in the tiny garden next to the home, apparently raking leaves even if there were none lying around. It was almost as if she wanted to stay outside of the home as much as possible, as if there was something in the house that frightened her. Apart from all of this, McCullough also frequently made calls to the police.